Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better. Hey, everybody, it's Susan Lindner. I'm back again as your host of Innovation Storytellers. I just want you to buckle up today because we're going to have a conversation about creativity like you have never had before. My guest today is Dr. Natalie Nixon, who, like me, is a fellow anthropologist. We cannot get enough anthropologists on this show. Natalie is known in our innovation world as the creativity whisperer for the C-suite. She has been selected as one of the top 50 keynote speakers in the world and is valued for her accessible expertise on creativity and the future of work and innovation. She advises leaders on transformation. So it's not about change management, right? We are talking about the big T, transformation, by applying wonder and rigor to amplify growth and business value. And she brings an innovative and unique perspective to every keynote and every strategic advisory engagement and leadership coaching session that she engages in. Natalie, like me, also shares the wanderlust. We are avid world travelers, and she's lived in 5 different countries and combines this very unique love of anthropology and fashion and academia and dance to distinguish her as a one-of-a-kind creativity expert. So I could go on and on about Dr. Natalie's incredible background, but I want to dive in already. And you can find her full bio on the show notes anyway. So Natalie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Susan. It's awesome to be here. Thank you for that warm welcome.
Well, we are just grateful. So let's get started. The first question I ask all of my guests is, how did you get here? How did you get into the wonderful world of innovation? And don't leave out one detail about the anthropological journey, because we are anthro nerds and we love it.
We are anthro nerds and we love it all day long. So my journey to this work in innovation has been an incredibly loopy journey. And probably, Susan, because you, like me, embraced cultural anthropology and felt home there. One of the reasons I felt home there was because I'm a very indecisive person. I'm also a very curious person. And there was something about the way cultural anthropology framed question asking ways to understand and observe human behavior in society that really made me feel like I didn't have to choose a lane. It was something very all encompassing about the techniques and the skills that I learned as a student of cultural anthropology and now a practicing qualitative researcher. So, like I said, I have a really loopy background. Studied cultural anthropology and Africana studies in college. I've been a middle school English teacher. I've been a fashion hat designer. I've owned my own hat design company called, wait for it, Nat's Hats.
Nat's Hats, yes.
I've also worked in the sourcing side of global fashion and lived and worked abroad in Sri Lanka and Portugal, making bras and panties for the Victoria's Secret account. And I've been a professor. I was a professor for 16 years, and I first taught the business of fashion. And then I created and launched a strategic design MBA program. And it was an executive MBA program that integrated design thinking into how we learn leadership and strategy and finance and branding. But it was actually my leap of faith to decide to earn a PhD while working full time. Very naive, because I thought, oh, it's just a big old paper at the end.
It's just a big old paper. There's no hours of research involved, years of research involved in between.
That's right. And it was just mind blowing because that was the next phase in my intellectual growth where I finally found a hook upon which I could hang my hat. And that hook was this field of design management, design thinking, strategic design. My PhD is in design management. And it was in this very challenging 4-year chapter of earning my PhD that I was exposed to an incredibly rich interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary framing for strategy and for looking at business problems and opportunities very differently. And out of that learning is when I approached the university and said, we should be doing something in this space. And like a lot of organizations, they said, great, you do it. So I was like, okay. So that was how I and a few really key colleagues, we worked together to launch the Strategic Design MBA program. But even in the midst of forming that academic program, my professional network really expanding to people in the startup world, people who were working to spark innovation in large organizations, I always had this sense that we needed a lingua franca in the way we talked about innovation.
Right.
There are so many ways people go about it, talk about it, describe it. And it was that inkling that probably was, when I reflect on it, was probably the beginning of my way into it, really landing in this work of creativity, of applied creativity. Because as you know, Susan, I think that creativity is actually the engine for innovation. We actually will not be too successful in consistently and sustainably innovating in our personal lives and in our organizations if we don't build a capacity for and a competency for creativity. So I'll pause there, but that's kind of all of the loose threads that have converged into my particular way of working in innovation.
I can't get off of what you said about I've always been an indecisive person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, going through a divorce with my spouse, he said one of the things that drove him most crazy about me is my indecision. It took me 3 years to pick out 3 bathroom tile for our for our renovation. And I'm like, there's so many choices. But the way I hear you frame it and the way I think about studying anthropology and frankly studying innovation, at some point you make choices.
Yes.
But the ability to consider a wide parameter of choices is actually a massive strength.
Yes.
And of course, I'm just turning this all on my ex, but in any event, but the ability to fathom a wide array of choices and to look at those, as all of us do who work in innovation, to say, what path will I take? And it's not necessarily that one is wrong, but one certainly could be righter than another in terms of profitability, time to market, disruption to the internal structures that allow the innovation to grow and scale. So that was the first thing that struck me that you said. But the other thing is that we all require a creativity engine in order to fuel innovation. And I just want to let that sink in for the audience for a moment, because how often do we as innovators take that really critical creative thinking time? We might be in planning mode or strategic mode, but that's very different than being in creativity mode. Natalie, can you just give us some examples? So you're in engagement with a client, and how does it work? I mean, I don't think I even knew that, a PhD in design management, right, was even a possibility. I'm not exactly sure what design management even is, in its complexity, and B, in its practical application in the world. So I asked too many questions on top of each other. Let's start with number one. How does a client engage with you around their creativity, about making this a practice within innovation?
Well, the first step, and as in so many complex situations is to admit that one has a problem, right?
It all goes back to AA, doesn't it? We're all 12 steppers in one way or another,
That's
right?
right.
That's
It
right.
all requires that we admit something's not
Something
quite
right.
right. We need help, right? So a lot of the times, by the time that I'm invited in to contribute and advise on a process, the caca has hit the fan a bit, right? And what that looks like is, question like kind of existential questions like, is this the business we should be in? These new young snappy upstarts are starting to eat our lunch. Like, what the heck? What's going on? We've been churning for the past 17 years, and does this still make sense? We are really feeling the great resignation. What does that mean internally? So it first really does require an admission of need and just an openness in the mindset of leadership to try it a different way. And I have to say, Susan, that I'm in year 5 of building my company, Figure Eight Thinking. And in the first couple of years, as I was molding my point of view of how I might help my clients and contribute in a distinctive way, I was really shy about leading with what I now lead so boldly with, which is creativity. And that's because, as you know, in the hallowed halls of corporate America, if you lead with creativity, most of the time people run for the hills. They think they'll get like you have 3 heads. And that's because most organizations don't really understand creativity. They've siloed it in the design or parts of marketing areas. It's pretty siloed. It's treated as like lipstick on a pig. It is not understood as something beyond the realm of the arts. And so the first step is really admission. And the second step is to introduce this idea that if we think about creativity as our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems, then we realize that not only the most exceptional dancers and musicians and painters are creative, but so are the best lawyers and engineers and accountants and teachers when they are intentionally toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. So on my website, which is actually going through a major renovation, the big relaunch will happen this end of this February 2022. I map out, and there's a section on the current website as well, but I map out 4 stages that we basically go through. And the stages involve first assessing the current state. And that's really doing an audit of what currently is, because you can't really figure out where we want to go until we know really where we are. So what is the state of the art currently? And even before that assessment, it's really, I work very hard to understand the questions that leadership has. It's not like, what's the problem statement, but what are your questions? Because questions are, first of all, so exciting, I think. It's a much more interesting way to think about a challenge. They invite us to expand our thinking, and we can morph questions. Our questions can evolve and grow. And in my view, you can tell a lot more about a person, about an organization, by the quality of their questions than by, their resolute answers, right? So it's really first framing the question of this journey that we're going to go on. It's assessing the present state. It's envisioning an incredibly audacious future state. That's the next phase. And it's really important to allow for the time and space to do that envisioning work, because we rarely do. And I mean really audacious. The more audacious and big, the better. Because
Give me an example, because I think some of us are so locked into I got to get it done mode that like the thought of going, wow, we could make.
So, for example, I worked with a major global law firm that, to its credit, and it is doing well, but and to its credit, decided, given the recidivism of young attorneys, given the churn of work that attorneys are feeling full disclosure, I'm married to that sort of beautiful brain. I'm married to a lawyer. So there's a certain type of person who's already driven to go to law school and enter that really hard race of making partner and all that sort of thing. So there's that personality and that kind of A-type drivenness combined with the brutal realities of the work. And their question was, how might we be the number one law firm in the future that attracts and retains the best talent? And what I loved about that question was that they didn't assume that it would look like the way they're currently doing things, because there was loss of really good talent, because it's gotten super competitive in that particular sector, the legal sector, because they're working on a global scale. And what we did was we did a 4-week design sprint. This was all virtual. This was over 6 different time zones.
Wow.
We identified 20 people who were committed to this process. And it was very uncomfortable for them, because these are people who were like trying to get to the answer, right? But as I reminded them through this process of the innate skills they have, for example, for scenario planning, right? One of the things I've observed from being married to an attorney, the creativity that I see in the practice of law is actually this combination of, you know the guardrails, you know the rules, the law, and to get to a potential outcome for the bit that will serve the good of your client, you have to, and this comes from my fashion background, I call it walk the table. And walk the table is a metaphor that I made up from the way I observe the way tailors work. Before a tailor cuts into the fabric, they put out the fabric onto the table and they walk around the fabric over and over. And they're looking at how the light hits the fabric from different angles, how the patterns, if it's a print, if it's a weave, if it's a knit, all the different ways that the drape affects the look of the fabric, because you only get to cut once, right? So you need to walk the table. And attorneys are really excellent in their ability to see a situation and zoom out and identify multiple ways into that solution and anticipate unintended consequences if we take pathway A, pathway B, pathway C. That's super creative. That's an incredibly creative process that yields an innovative outcome. So, so this is a sector, number one, that isn't always considered super innovative, right? That's trying to keep up with all of the demands of clients who are trying to innovate. They're working with clients in technology, in healthcare, in environmentalism, and energy. And they need to develop a mindset that meets their clients where they are and beyond. So that's an example of taking them through a process that, what I loved about the ideas that they co-created. I'm the provocateur.
Right. So what's the question you ask them when you're on step 2? So 1 is the assessment, right? 2 is the envisioning the giant future. What do you ask them?
I ask them to practice framing what I call divergent questions. Those of us who work in innovation design thinking know that it's a process of divergent, convergent thinking. Diverge, converge, right? It's this ebb and flow. And there's actually a taxonomy of questions. Not all questions are created equally. So divergent questions are questions like, what if? Why? I wonder, right? Where might we?
If only.
If only. Convergent questions are what we need to get tactical towards the end of the process. So where, when, what, how, right?
And who can do this?
And who, yeah. And always we're keeping the who in mind, because it's not about us. It's about the people who are consuming our services, experience, etc. I also wanted to say the reason why it's so important to envision and be really audacious is that you will have to edit down. Like it's not going to stay big, but you got to give yourself permission to be that dreamy and big, because you're going to have to edit down because of limitations in time. So here are the major resources we always run out of: time, money, and human talent, right? We don't always have access to those resources in the same amounts at the same frequency. So we're going to have to edit that down. The third phase is prototyping, right? So how can we develop small, rough draft, ugly mock-ups of this idea and test it out really quickly? And what do we learn from that? This is also a big leap in a mental model for a lot of my clients, because if they had been trained in traditional MBA programs or law school programs or medical school programs, it is about, having the solution, the answer yesterday. And prototyping is about experimentation. It's about embracing the rough draft, build, test, learn, going back, tweaking it, not going off into a secluded corner, working on the best idea ever, gilding it in gold, putting it up on a shelf, and not doing the big reveal until 6 months later. No, in prototyping, we want to do maybe every 2 weeks, even every week. A month is long to start to get feedback. And then the final phase is implementation and execution. So where in the organization can we begin to make this real? And my preference is always to have a vertically integrated team that's not just the top leadership, vertically and horizontally integrated, because those perspectives from those diverse groups of individuals will see someone else will see the speed bumps I would have never thought to see. So that implementation is also important. So that group of 20 in this example I'm giving with this big law firm, this global law firm, there were new associates, there were partners, there were people from different practice areas, which is really important. And what I loved as the outcome from that particular project was that their prototypes led to interventions to make them the number one law firm down the line. They weren't just about their hiring practices, or weren't just about, there were a couple of ideas that were around technology. The two that really resonated with them, there were 4 ideas that emerged, but the two that really resonated were around the emotional and social needs of practicing attorneys. I learned this from this project. There's a high level rate of suicide
among lawyers.
Wow. And they addressed that head on. And I was really impressed. And I credit the process that got them to being that vulnerable, and admission to, we are humans showing up to work, trying to do this work. Let's address that dimension of our work.
And did the firm have that experience of losing a lawyer to suicide?
I did not dig too far into that, but there was enough.
It was close enough
about it that it was not an abstract concept for them.
Yeah. So they designed the more human law firm. That's the outcome.
That would ensure that if you come and join our law firm, it's table stakes that, your pedigree is great, your stuff, but we want to design a working environment for you where you will flourish and thrive as a person, in addition to, because if you're not thriving as a person, you actually won't be a better attorney.
Right.
You won't be able to serve your clients well.
Fantastic. So, and amazing to think that I want to think about what is the number one law firm in the world. And it starts with being better humans, not necessarily being better lawyers per se. So, and what a revelation, and also an innovation, right? I mean, I remember still when Google said, we're going to feed all of our employees for free. And there were old tech companies that were like, are you kidding? Like IBM is not opening a cafeteria for free for its employees. And what Google, may have counted on or not is that people never wanted to leave the building. Why should I go out and buy? So now I'm saving an hour of my employees' time. I'm creating collaborative moments where people can break bread. One of the most instinctual rituals we know as anthropologists, where people eat together, share with one another, commune with one another at one of the most humane events in our lives that we do 3 times a day, and find a way to create collaborative opportunities and break down silos across the organization in ways that perhaps IBM never could have envisioned. And I want to ask you a question because it's something that I think about now, almost 50 episodes into the podcast and writing a book on innovation storytelling is how much do you think that gender is shifting the way we design innovation? And I say this because it's been top of mind for me for maybe like the last 10 episodes, but the command and control structures that we used to use to govern corporations are not serving us. They are not serving us in the midst of COVID. They are not serving the military in command and control structures when we see the level of suicide and PTSD that face our veterans when they come home. We've applied that command and control structure to corporations, and we are unwinding from it in this moment. And I'm so curious what you think about it, because as a woman, I think about my natural inclination is to collaborate with other brilliant people to complete a task. Like, it's inherent. And I was having a conversation with a filmmaker friend last night who said, why is it that every exemplar of an American hero starts with John Wayne, Superman, Steve Jobs, even in our innovation world? And I raise him often as an exemplar of innovation, but is the one lone man hero scenario that is here to save the world, right? And we think of it as entrepreneurs, as intrapreneurs. But tell me a little bit about what you think about the collaborative process and the stories that we tell one another about what makes for a successful innovation program, when so often we still turn to the single male hero of the story. What do we need to change, Natalie?
Yeah, you're right. The iconography around the mythology around innovation is very white, cis male, normative, right? It's so we don't.
It's military based too, right? It's that captain commander at the top and worker drones at the bottom.
Although in defense of the military, I will say that the military sector was one of the first sectors that really exercised design thinking. Because if you think about it, on a battlefield, it's all improvisation. And what is improvisation? Improvisation is not doing whatever you feel like. That's not what improvisation is. Improvisation is an incredible knowledge of the rules so that situationally you can extend them, you can rebound against them, you can reframe. That's what jazz musicians do incredibly well. Jazz musicians know music theory, they practice incessantly, their compositions have a beginning, a middle, and end. There's a chord progression, there's a key that you play in. Those are rules, those are guidelines. What happens in the interstices is the magic. That's the wonder. The rigor are those rules. It is what is called a chaotic system, which is a term that comes from D. Hock, who was the first president of Visa, the credit card company. So in defense of the military, there's actually an incredible amount of scenario planning and improvisation that is expected in situ because of the immense amount of unknown and uncertainty in reality. But your question about is work gendered? I don't know enough to say. Like, as a woman, I'm not a person who thinks the world would just be better if women were in charge. I don't believe that. As a Black American, I don't believe the world would be better if only people of color were in charge. Because human behavior means that we get greedy, we get selfish, we get short-sighted, right? I do think that whatever person is on the margins, because of their gender, because of their ethnicity, because of their limited ability, because of their socioeconomic status, there is actually an incredible advantage I've experienced, as I'll say, as a Black American woman. There's an incredible advantage because when one is on the margins and is constantly navigating in and out, right? There's some times where I have access, sometimes when I'm totally shut out. Sometimes when I'm like sitting in the side of the room, sometimes when I'm on the stage. But because of my rich, diverse experiences of being in so many different positions where I've had incredible perspective, that's an asset, right? So I think that what happens is what we're seeing is when one is on the margins because of one's gender, to use your example, you have a very different perspective about, what if we tried it this way? Because you're just naturally seeing things differently. Because, so many of us women, we have those examples in our careers where we thought of the idea 2 weeks ago and someone else brings it up in a meeting and all of a sudden it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, we brought it up. There was barely a nod, right? But
And even in the Obama White House, there was like 3 women would converge and they would strategize ahead of time. Okay, I'll bring up the idea. You second the idea. Someone else will say they heard it somewhere else where it's already validated. And it's 3 women with brilliant ideas who are sitting in front of a, formerly marginalized individual who still had to effort in order to get their ideas across to another brilliant person.
Still had to strategize. Still had to strategize. Right. Very smart. Right. But in my opinion, there is something uniquely advantageous in a tragic way about being.
Because constraint gives us, opportunities that we couldn't see before. It's part of the whole innovation paradigm, right? Is constraint allows us to innovate within particular parameters.
As I like to say, creativity loves constraints. Creativity loves constraints on your time, constraints on resources, constraints on, you name it. It is that bottleneck pressure that is almost required to converge and then diffuse out a very original way of thinking. And by the way, that originality, most of the time, there's a chapter in my book called, or there's a section of a chapter in my book called There's Nothing New Under the Sun. Because a lot of times it's about the mashup. It's about the remix. It's about the recombination of things that someone else never would have thought to put together, that you may have had to put together because that's all you had to work with, right? That was like, that's the amount of time you had. That was what was at your avail. So I think that often it is a combination of women's sensibility combined with having to navigate terrain where we get very good at making other people feel comfortable with us. People of color are excellent at this when we are minority members in a situation. But whatever your position is as a person, when you've had to be on the margins, there is that advantage, which is an incredible asset.
Yeah. I think about that improvisational or just constraints. I mean, just the genre of soul food, right, is kind of being given scraps and turning it into some of the most delicious cuisine imaginable, right? It's like, that is an example of constraints leading to brilliance.
That's right.
And a very big belly. Thank you. So these 4 steps are really enlightening, I think, for those of us listening who say, how often have I taken the time to just stop and think about my big wide world of what could be different? And I'm wondering if there's anything, Natalie, that you want us to think about as innovators, given the work that you do. What should we be thinking about? It's the beginning of the year. It feels like, maybe, knock wood, that we're coming out of this COVID contagion that perhaps would allow us to expand our breadth just a little bit more. What can we do to bring that creativity into our innovation work on the daily?
Well, what I'm going to share is maybe it will sound counterintuitive, or maybe it will feel, and I hate this phrase, but maybe like the soft skills. And I think I have a slide in a lot of my keynotes where I talk about how soft skills are super hardcore.
I love that. Yes. I think the soft skills category. I'm like, if you can't speak, it's not soft. It's called fired.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, it's called fired. I mean, soft skills like curiosity and empathy and collaboration and anticipating what's next. Let's face it, in the fourth industrial revolution, where tasks are going to be taken over by AI, robotics, etc., there is actually the in spite of all the casualties that we're going to experience in the fourth industrial revolution, which, the trains left the station, we are in the fourth industrial revolution. In spite of those challenges in the fourth industrial revolution, we have a lot of opportunities to allow more room for the human to show up. So I'm going to share something that I have been noodling on. I'm starting to write about it. I'm a contributor to Fast Company magazine. One of my upcoming articles, I'm going to dive into this topic. It's something I call invisible work. And I'm not referring to the invisible work that feminists often refer to when we talk about women's invisible work.
Right.
When I frame invisible work, I've been really interested in, I developed a framework called the 3 I's. And the 3 I's, my offering to help people understand, how do you toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems on a consistent basis? The way you do that, the way you operationalize creativity, is through the 3 I's, which are inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. The intuition piece and the curiosity piece and the improv piece, since writing The Creativity Leap, I'm becoming more and more interested in learning about and teaching myself about the neuroscience of creativity. And what's become more fascinating to me is how we are physiologically hardwired to really exercise these air quote soft skills, to really act on our intuition. So for example, we have in our bodies something called the vagus nerve, not like Las Vegas, but VAGUS. It's the
But
second.
it's activated when you win in a casino, just so you know. It's definitely activated.
It's the second longest nerve in the body. The first longest nerve is our spinal cord, an extension of the brain. And the vagus nerve goes from your brain down through your heart into your gut. So when we say things like, my gut is telling me, yeah, it is. It actually is. And so what I'm becoming more fascinated about is, as we try to make the space and time for the wonder, because wonder is about audacity, deep curiosity, awe, and pausing. You cannot wonder when you're going 80 miles an hour. So you have to design space and time to do that. And what's become really remarkable to me is I reflect on, well, how does one activate these ways that we are designing our bodies to tap into our intuition, to ponder, to wonder? It's those times when we are observing, when we are letting ideas marinate, when we are asking new and different questions of ourselves and of others. And if we applied the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, 80% of the work that has to be done is that invisible work. It can't be tracked. It can't be monitored. It can't be, there's not an obvious metric to apply to it. It's that big divergent work that I used to think, gosh, am I procrastinating? And finally, around my 30s, I accepted about myself, that's just the way I work. That's just the way it is. There's so much that has to marinate, and I'm taking in and it's percolating. And then that 20% time, it converges and boom, it begins to synthesize and distill. But that time prior to that, it's a big chunk of time. So that invisible work, we must allow ourselves the space and the time to dive into that, so that we are more creative. And when we are more creative, that will allow us to really land on some incredible innovations. And by the way, since your show is Innovation Storytellers, I would like to share my definition of innovation. I think of innovation as an invention converted into scalable value. And that value could be financial value, cultural value, social value. But what's the conversion factor? How do you convert? How do you go from an invention to an innovation? The conversion factor is creativity. It's that toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems that helps you to go from that invention to that scalable valued idea. And that process requires that invisible work. It requires that we incentivize for it. And by incentivization, I mean, you don't say, okay, guys, I want to make sure that you ask better questions or that you get better improvising. Give people budget to do that. Give people time to do that. Give people a team or the ability to coalesce with new members of the organization with whom they would have never talked to before, to do that invisible work, whose product is just profound, amazing results.
Yeah. And that really is the key to the big T, the transformation.
Yes, it
Yeah.
really is. It really is.
Well, now we're coming up on our time together. And so I need to ask you our hot seat questions that I ask all of my guests here on Innovation Storytellers. So I would love your feelings on if you could be on any innovation team in the history of humanity, what innovation team would you have liked to have joined, even up till today?
Okay, well, again, I'm a Libra, totally indecisive. The flip side is
I
very diplomatic, but I'm always factoring multiple possible options here. So actually, and this was a really hard, shitty time to be a Black American, but I would love to be on Harriet Tubman's innovation team because that woman was amazing.
Wow.
She was a strategist. She was a liberator. She was a spy. She was subversive. She was so smart. She was a naturalist. She was able to read the land and the sky and the stars in order to navigate incredibly uncertain terrain. She was an innovator
And fearless.
fearless, courageous. Well, I'm sure she was terrified a lot of the time. And in spite of that fear, she proceeded.
Yeah.
So man, like I would not want to have to live during those times as my current identity, but I so admire and respect and love Harriet Tubman and what she did for our country.
Yeah.
It wasn't just what she did for Black Americans. It's what she did for our country.
Yeah.
And so she was friggin' innovative.
And at the head of the suffragette movement as well.
That's right. Period, full stop. The other person, and I've just recently started learning about this woman, math is not my strength. However, Grace Hopper might have wanted to use me to help her. Grace Hopper is considered the grandmama of AI. Grace Hopper it was an alumna of also my college, Vassar College. She was a mathematician. She, during the Second World War, she designed and developed computer language to help computers talk to each other instead of humans constantly having to input. Sorry for any scientists and mathematicians out there. I'm totally butchering your work right now.
The original innovation storytellers.
My first grade interpretation of what Grace Hopper did. But she was just a badass. She was amazing. She worked under this general who was a Harvard professor. He never hooked her up and helped her she had a PhD. He never hooked her up and helped her to become a professor after the war. She had some troubles in her personal life. She had some alcoholism in her life. She was
that might cause you to drink a little.
Yeah, you think? So it's like so many people like who you've never heard of. Like, why don't we have a national Grace Hopper month, week, day, at least a stamp, please? And I believe there's a film coming out about her life, but she was just so important in the war effort and in forging ahead science and machine intelligence. She was just amazing.
Okay, 2 more quick questions. Greatest innovation of all time.
Greatest innovation of all time.
What's your fave?
I mean, I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for, but I just think the wheel.
The wheel. We'll start at the beginning. Sure.
I think the wheel.
And what's one thing you would love to see innovated or created that doesn't exist today? Any annoyance or thing that you wish, God, someone should just fix this already. What is it?
Mammogram tests.
Oh my God, I love you. Yes. Why? Why does it have to be this way? Thank you.
Doesn't make sense. Only if you do not have breasts does that way of doing a mammogram make sense.
Oh my gosh.
Let's have an intervention and innovation for mammogram testing.
Yes, the boob squashing must stop.
It
So
must.
best answer yet, 50 episodes in. Natalie, thank you so much. So if people want to get in touch with you, want to know what it's like to have one of the top 50 keynote speakers in the world come and speak to their audiences, how can they get in contact with you?
Thank you so much, Susan. The best way to contact me is to go to figure8thinking.com. That's the word figure, the number 8 thinking.com, and follow me at Nat W. Nixon on Instagram and Twitter, and definitely connect with me on LinkedIn, where I'm listed as Natalie Nixon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Natalie Nixon. It's just an honor to have you on Innovation Storytellers today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you might be asking, Susan, why innovation storytelling? Well, the truth is that an innovation story told well not only breaks down communication barriers so you can drive change and new growth, but it also helps other people remember and champion your work. And it propels your best ideas forward faster to secure you the runway, resources, and recognition you so richly deserve. In other words, stories are memory-making devices that significantly reduce the time it takes for you and your innovation to be understood. But like many leaders, you probably never got the memo that storytelling skills would be central to your success. Well, I've got some good news for you. It's not too late because I've got you covered. Whether you need an expert to come and speak to your innovation leaders, you need training in the art and method of innovation storytelling, or you just need the support and guidance of a consultant who can get you where you want to go in less time, visit www.susanlinder.com today to learn more and to set up a call to discuss your needs. I'm so looking forward to connecting with you and to helping you tell a great innovation story. If you liked what you heard so far, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode. And leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. And if you didn't like what you've heard, just forget everything I've said.